Yo, what's up guys, hope you guys are doing good. So today we are going to see what if Naruto got harem with Kushina and Mito part 2. Hope you will enjoy this video, so before we start please like the video and subscribe to our channel and hit bell notification, it motivates me to upload more fanfics for my lovely audience. So let's get started.
Were these people really that blind? And Naruto, the poor boy. Sarutobi knew the child had it hard. He was no fool. He was well aware of how the village treated Naruto. But so far, at least, it was okay. The child was adopted by a nice woman. Sarutobi could sigh in relief at that. He looked on, troubled. Although Naruto was safe for now, he really needed to be aware of who his mother was, but that was the problem. Are you sad about losing your position, Sarutobi? Homura questioned, misunderstanding the man's distress. No, I am glad that I can pass on the title of Hokage. But, Koharu inquired, raising an eyebrow at Sarutobi's pause. Are we really sure about this? Kushina is capable, of course, but is this really the right decision? It is the right decision, Koharu put in, narrowing her eyes at him. It was a unanimous vote, with yours among ours. Sarutobi grimaced. Relax, Sarutobi, Homura said gently. I cannot think of a better leader than the wife of our late Hokage. Sarutobi didn't reply. It seemed that he was on his own. They had made up their minds a long time ago. There she comes, Homura announced. All elders looked down, noticing the crowd clearing a path for two figures. Kushina walked at her leisure. She stared straight ahead, giving nobody else a glance. She watched as the crowd cleared a path for her. Well, she was sure she would soon be their new Hokage. Mito walked next to her, holding her hand throughout the journey. Everyone was silent as they watched them pass. They would cheer, but not now. Hidden behind a wall, Naruto watched the scene curiously. It was that woman again. She was what the crowd was fussing over. She was going to be their new Hokage. Was that why she came to Konoha? Who was she? Naruto didn't understood what unknown force drew him towards the woman. It was a feeling of familiarity, but he was certain that he had never seen the woman before. What was so interesting about her? What made him so keen to look at her? She wasn't special. She was just like all of them, a liar, someone who he could never trust. To him, she was just like any other villager. His stare turned cold. When Kushina made it to the top of the tower, she was greeted with the former Konoha squad. Welcome, Kushina, Homura bowed. Kushina nodded to them all. They began the process. It had been rehearsed prior to D-Day. And now, everything was running smoothly. Koharu spoke to Konoha. She made a point to highlight the past Hokage of the village. She spoke of their bravery, their knowledge, their dedication, and most importantly, their will of fire. She praised their past efforts in shaping Konoha to what it currently was. She pointed out the history of the first Hokage, and then moved on to the next, until she came to Minato. Sad faces greeted her words. The fourth Hokage met an early demise. He didn't live on to prosper all the fruits of his labor, and a happy life was stolen from him. It was a heavy loss for Konoha. Then, she focused on Sarutobi again. It was brief. She turned to Kushina, giving her a nod of content, and then turned back to the village. She started talking about the Uzumaki woman, highlighting key points for Konoha to know, her past as a refugee, her marriage to Minato, her duties to the village, and her sacrifice in the Kyuubi attack. All her efforts earned shouts of praise from the village. Kushina's eyes flashed in fury, but it was too fast for anyone to notice, and it was gone. Homura put his hands up in the air to silence the noisy village. They stilled, waiting. He turned his gaze to Kushina. It is time. Kushina nodded and approached Sarutobi. The man held an even stare, but she could see the confusion in it. She could see the inner turmoil playing out in the man's visage. Whatever was wrong with him was not her problem. Hello, Kushina, Sarutobi greeted. Sarutobi, Kushina acknowledged. Before I bestow to you this hat, I need you to recite the oath with Koharu. Kushina nodded, turning her attention to said woman. Koharu smiled while saying, repeat after me. I, Kushina Uzumaki Namikaze. I, Kushina Uzumaki Namikaze. They continued the oath like before. The villagers watched in rapt interest as the inauguration drew to a close. As your Hokage. As your Hokage. Koharu allowed a tired grin and turned to Sarutobi. Sarutobi's mouth thinned, but he approached Kushina nonetheless. By the power bestowed on me, he placed the hat above the redhead's head. I, Hiruzen Sarutobi, name you, Kushina Uzumaki Namikaze, my successor. He placed the hat on Kushina. The crowd erupted into frenzy, screaming and shouting in happiness. Kushina walked to the front of the Hokage Tower's roof and addressed the people of Konoha. Thank you for your acceptance. I swear to you all, I will strive to maintain and strengthen Konoha, so future generations can take pride in this village. Our will of fire will remain strong for as long as I stand. The crowd cheered again, louder, and more vocally than before. Kaharu stood next to Kushina and addressed the mob. I give you all, Kushina Uzumaki Namikaze, 5th Hokage of Konohagakure. The celebration started in the afternoon. Carnival games were on display and everyone was involved. The streets were filled with dancing civilians. Even shinobi that would usually be on duty, allowed themselves time to unwind and join the mass. Some civilians drank sake to their heart's content, some already walking sluggishly, suffering from the after effects of too much alcohol. Music was played all around the village, some good, others horrible, but people couldn't care less. It soon turned dark in Konoha, but people continued to revel, undeterred by time. The streetlights illuminated the entire village, providing vibrant colors. Kushina sat on a special table, which was made exclusively for members of the council. She watched kids run around gleefully, she watched couples playing the many games on offer, she watched hammered civilians pass out a few feet from her. She watched all these things, dispassionately. It is not to your liking, Hokage-sama? Inoichi asked from his seat. No, I have a lot on my mind, that's all. Well, you don't need to worry about anything now. Celebrate. Kushina looked to the person that spoke, Shikaku. He had a blush on his face, and it seemed like he was having trouble concentrating with the way he swayed back and forth in his seat. He was drunk. Kushina mentally shook her head. What a world. Kushina Uzumaki Namikaze. Kushina looked to who called her. It was man, one eye covered in bandages and using a cane to support his frame. He looked shady, dodgy. He walked to the council table, undaunted. Kushina felt a tug in her mind, warning not to do anything rash. She frowned at him. Please return to your civilian celebration. This table is strictly for council members only. The man froze mid-stride. He looked at her, bewildered. I am a council member. Kushina frowned further, she had not been expecting that. She didn't notice him in the last meeting. Now, Kushina, don't tell me you don't remember me, Danzo. Of course I remember you. Danzo stared at her for a long time, analyzing her body language. Something wasn't right with her, he could tell, but continued the farce, plastering a grin that didn't suit his face. That's good to know. Please excuse me while I take my seat on the other side. Kushina nodded, but she didn't say anything else. In fact, if Danzo had looked more closely, he would have seen her apprehension to speak further. Kushina looked around, and mentally sighed in relief when she noticed nobody was paying attention to her. That had been too close for comfort. Ka-chan. Kushina looked to her side. Mito was in a seat directly next to her. Normally, it would not be allowed, but she was Hokage now, and things were different. Yes, Mito-chan. Where is Sarutobi Gigi? He said he needed to rest. He's at his home. Oh, I hope he's okay. Kushina rolled her eyes. You worry too much, little one. I can't help it. Mito protested. Kushina shook her head. You're just too knee. Get away from here, demon. Kushina's head whipped to the voice. It was a man. He had in his one hand an empty sake bottle. He was looming over a child. At least, that's what Kushina could tell. She squinted her eyes to focus, and they widened. The boy's head was bowed, blonde hair covering his eyes. His dry lips were partially parted. He just stood still. You think you can dig in my bins and get away with it? The drunken man slurred. Naruto didn't move. He knew if he did, the man could give chase. In doing so, the man could discover where he lived. No, he couldn't move. He couldn't let them take away his necessities. He needed to wait. Did you not hear me, you piece of shit? The man demanded. Naruto's heart was beating erratically. This was for the best. He had dealt with drunkards before. It was best to do nothing, to wait for the opportune moment. He felt like kicking himself from getting caught, but he had been curious about the celebration. A moment ago, he had been sleeping in his box, then he heard music. He woke to lights and laughter. He was surprised that people were taking this whole Hokage thing so seriously. It seemed like there were a lot of things going on, and he had been inquisitive to know more. At first, he snuck where he could, trying to see what activities were held. He saw many things, but one stood out. Toys, the vendors were literally giving them to every child in the village. He saw stand owners calling kids over and handing them dolls, balls, action figures, masks, and paddles. He always wanted a ball, and those masks looked so beautiful and enticing. He never felt them before, he never knew their texture, how smooth they were, the secrets behind putting them on. His 7-year-old mind couldn't help itself. He wanted a mask terribly. So he snuck around some more, hiding in places he was sure people wouldn't catch him, until he saw his prize in plain view. There were masks thrown away. They were in bins, but were pretty close to the festival. He tried to dissuade himself from going further, his survival instincts kept screaming at him to run away, hide in his home and wait for another day, but he just couldn't help himself. He dashed to the bins, both in desperation and trepidation. He had to take a mask and then run. That was the plan, but he had gotten caught in his haste. I'm talking to you, demon. The man bellowed, raising his bottle in the air. Naruto closed his eyes. He hated this. He hated how powerless he felt against all of them. He hated how he still thought of her, the woman that took his heart and tore it apart without mercy. He hated how these moments made him want to run to her, to beg her to take him back, to tell her that he'll be good as long she loved him. He stood there, waiting for the strike to his head. He could already taste the blood and his body shook. The man brought his arm down, aiming squarely for the child's cranium. His movements were swift and his intentions were clear. He wanted to hurt the child as much as he could. Clap. Naruto heard the sound. He winced, expecting to feel pain at any moment, but he felt nothing. He waited and continued to feel no pain. He slowly opened his eyes. He looked up, eyes widening in disbelief. The red-headed woman was standing over him, one hand latching to his attacker's wrist. She held him in place, looking at him emotionlessly. What do you think you're doing? She questioned tersely. The man blinked a few times and sputtered. Kushina-sama, please let me deal with this demon. Kushina leveled a glare at the man, which shut him up. Walk away, she said warningly. The man stared at her in surprise, but nodded in respect and started walking elsewhere. Kushina looked around her. She was surprised to notice that no one seemed to care about the scene. In fact, they acted ignorant of it. The only people that had their attention on her were the council and her daughter. She looked at the council members. Some stared guiltily, others glared at the blonde boy. She really didn't know what to make of it all. She turned to the boy. He was still rooted to the spot. She noticed that he was shaking. It was evidently fear that took over him. Child, she addressed monotonically, are you all right? Naruto didn't say a thing. It had gotten worse. This new Hokage was involved now. She couldn't be trusted. She wanted to hurt him. He shook his head furiously, realizing that he had to get out of this place. He turned around and broke into a sprint, running as fast as his legs could carry. Kushina stared in shock as the blonde ran away from her. Her arm had been raised to reach him, but froze in the air. She watched on as the party continued, staring in disarray. Dot. Kushina and her daughter had decided to excuse themselves from the celebration. Hordes of people cheered at her yet again as she left them to their own devices. She knew they wouldn't stop the party just because she left, but she had lost her appetite for it all. They were back in the Namikaze estate. She was currently tucking Mito into bed. Ka-chan. Yes, little one. Why did that man try to hurt that boy? Did he do something bad? Kushina looked at her daughter. The little girl was cluttered and worried. Kushina could understand. She felt the same way, to some extent. I'm not sure, Mito-chan, but I'll get to the bottom of it, okay? Mito still looked distressed. That big man was a meanie, wasn't he? Yeah, it sure seemed that way. Mito's frown deepened. That's not fair. I hope that boy is okay. Quote. Kushina didn't reply. She had seen that child before, digging through rubbish bins. She was familiar with what that situation implied. The child was homeless. Get some sleep, sweetie. We'll talk in the morning. Mito yawned. Okay, Ka-chan. Kushina turned off the lights and left the girl's room. She went into her own, going straight to bed and covering herself with a blanket. The weather had suddenly grown colder. She had felt the temperature drop when she was walking with Mito to their home. Her mind strayed to the boy again. If she had to be honest with herself, she couldn't stop thinking about him. There was something to the blonde. She couldn't tell what it was, but every single time she saw him, it felt like she was under a spell. He fascinated her, he plagued her mind constantly. Kushina couldn't fathom the reason to these emotions. When she had seen that man raise his bottle to strike the blonde, she wanted nothing more than to rip out the drunkard's arms. Admittedly, she wanted to beat the man. But why? Why did she feel like that? It wasn't as if she gave anyone in this village her time of day. But the boy, what was it about him? She took a breath, calming her troubled mind. Now wasn't the time to think such thoughts. She needed sleep. She would deal with everything the next day. Mito tossed and turned in her bed. She soon sighed in frustration and tore the blankets from her body, before swiftly putting them on her again. It was so cold. How could weather change so fast? This place wasn't what she was used to. She could still hear the soft melody of music in the distance. The village was still into their celebrations, and it didn't seem like the weather affected them at all. She thought about many things, her life, her experiences, and her journey with her Ka-chan. The blonde. The boy. She had stared on in horror as the horrible man screamed at the boy, calling him terrible names. She had seen ground ups to some terrible things before, but she could not stop becoming immensely upset with that particular man. The boy didn't deserve that. He didn't even look like he was doing anything wrong. That thought made her even more upset. She wanted to help him, but she had been afraid to move, afraid of doing something wrong, but luckily, her Ka-chan acted out. She had seen homeless children before, and the boy fit the bill. She couldn't help her eyes from saddening. It was these moments that she hated luxury. She always felt guilty for having a better lifestyle, so she never asked for accessories, she never nagged her mother about stuff she wanted. She never acted spoiled. It would be like rubbing salt into fresh wounds if she did that. She stared at her ceiling, her arms and legs outstretched, lost in thought. So much had happened, and so many things were still left unchecked. She lay still, hearing something. It sounded like rustling, with an occasional clink and clank. She had a room that was closest to the gate. Her mother slept a room away. She honed her senses, trying to figure out if there were intruders in the house, but finally comprehended that the sound was coming from outside her home. Was someone out there just by their house? Was it villagers still celebrating? She got out of bed and went to her window. She peeked through. What she saw surprised her greatly. It was dark, but she could see a figure by the front gate, more specifically, at the rubbish bins that she and her Ka-chan used. She squinted her eyes. She didn't know what was going on, but when she saw a glimpse of yellow hair, she gasped. It was the boy. She watched on, the darkness making things timorously difficult to see. What was he doing? She knew he was homeless, but what could he possibly need that they threw away? She saw him shivering, and she finally understood. The weather, it was affecting him too. Judging by what the boy was wearing, Mito could only guess how freezing he must have been. He took out some curtains. She saw him wrap the fabric around him and was certain he was looking for warmth. But curtains wouldn't do for anyone. She ran to her closet, she took out the largest blanket she could find. Now, she had to do this carefully. She didn't want to wake her mother, Ka-chan would worry too much, so she snuck carefully out of her room, making sure to pass her mother's room silently. Once she was sure it was safe, she hurried down the stairs, opened her front door, and was immediately assaulted by the biting cold. She looked at her clothes and realized, to her dismay, she had little to protect herself from the freezing temperatures. Her body shook violently. She folded her hands around her body and grit her teeth. She looked at the blanket, it would provide her warmth, but no, it wasn't for her. Her teeth started chattering, she could see her own breath expelling alarmingly from her mouth. She didn't care. Her face was fixed in determination. She quickly walked to her gate. She analyzed the spaces in between bars. The blanket would fit. If not, then she would force through. She wouldn't dare open the gate itself. Ka-chan had warned her to keep it closed until she said otherwise. She would at least heed that warning. Once she was close enough to the bars, she softly called out, trying to still her shaking form, excuse me. Naruto's head turned sharply to the voice. He gasped, afraid that he had been caught. He hadn't planned on going out from his shelter, but the weather had been too cold for even newspapers to protect him. He walked around in desperation, looking for anything that could provide him warmth. People were all around. No place was safe for him. He ended up wandering to the Namikaze estate, but he hadn't known the owners of the place. The house looked empty. The lights were off and no one seemed to be home. He took the opportunity to look in bins nearby. He needed anything that provided warmth. After that, he would leave this place in peace. It wasn't as if he was a bad person. Stealing was a necessity that he needed to employ regularly in order to live. He used to feel guilty for it, but then, he felt justified. Now he was caught, and not just by anyone, but the Hokage's daughter. This was 10 times worse than stealing from any villager. The Hokage was respected by everyone, and if villagers were to find out about his actions, they would no doubt behead him on the spot. What about the Hokage herself? She would be furious if she found someone nosing about around her house. He hadn't known that it was her house, and that might have cost him his life. He never took his eyes off of the girl. Even if they were separated by a fence, she might still do something to harm him. He did notice that she was shaking a lot, no doubt in anger. He needed to get out of here. He needed here. His thought process froze. The girl's hands were outstretched, as if offering him what she held, a blanket. He focused on her more. She looked cold. Was that why she was shaking? But why would she be cold? She had a blanket in her hands. Mito felt her legs trembling as well. She grimaced, the cold affecting her badly. If she continued to stay out of the house, she would get sick, and Ka-chan would be upset. Please take it, she breathed haggardly, looking nervously to her home and then back. I saw you looking for something to keep yourself warm. I got the biggest one I could find. But Naruto didn't take it. He stared at her, shocked and still fearful. He couldn't do it. She was planning something. He couldn't trust her. Taking that blanket from her could get him killed. Mito looked at him, confused. She didn't understand why he wasn't taking the blanket from her. He seemed hesitant to approach her. She tried to soothe his unease by trying to smile, but the cold couldn't allow her visage to seem genuine. Don't be afraid. I won't hurt you. She is lying to you. His mind yelled. She could not be trusted. She would hurt him in a heartbeat, he was sure of it. He stared at her coldly. She will not trick him. Ka-san tricked him, and broke him. She will not break him like Ka-san. He took a step back. Mito noticed his apprehension immediately. He was ready to run, but she couldn't let him go without knowing he wouldn't be cold. She had been worried about him. She had to help him any way she could. It was too late, however, he ran away from her, the darkness providing plenty of cover. He soon disappeared. Mito looked down. She felt her heart lurch. He ran away from her. She was just trying to help. She was reminded of the cold again, it bit harshly into her soft skin. She bit her lip, looking at where the boy had run to. She couldn't see him anymore. She sighed dejectedly, making her way inside in sadness. Kushina continued to peer from her vantage point. She had watched the entire interaction between her daughter and the boy. She had seen behavior like that before. Distrust, it was a common feeling for those who had experienced betrayal, backstabbing. The kid must have been through a lot. If she had been in his shoes, she would have accepted Mito's offer. But she wasn't him, she didn't know exactly what he had been through. But she would find out. Dot. Dot. Naruto groaned when he felt the morning sun penetrate his box home. The night cold was still lingering in his mind. It was the coldest night of sleep he ever had. He groggily opened his eyes, sleepily making his way out of his makeshift shelter. He looked around. No one was nearby. He couldn't help but be jumpy. He had been discovered not once but twice. It was worse with the second. He had been afraid that he would wake up and find the Hokage demanding why he trespassed on her home, before she killed him, of course. Yesterday was horrible. The sting of hurt turned into a stab at the thought. It was the first time he had heard anyone openly call him a demon. He could feel tears gathering in his eyes, but he could care less. They hated him, they truly hated his guts. He had always known in the back of his mind, but to actually view the animosity for what it was made him feel sick. He didn't feel like doing anything today. His stomach grumbled, forcing him to flinch. He was hungry again, but he had run out of food, and he didn't feel like going out and looking for more. He was depressed. What was the point of living here? He had tried to run away from the village, but Anbu would always stop him, forcing him back to his predicament. He looked at his box home. It wouldn't be holding up soon. The cardboard looked like it could fall apart at any moment. Great, he had no other choice but to look for a new one. His face dropped. He didn't care anymore. If he died from starvation or something else, maybe the next life would be better. He made his way to his home again, planning on spending the rest of the day in slumber. So this is where you live. Naruto's heart stopped. He could try to convince himself that he was hearing things, but the voice was too close for comfort, and it sounded too real to ignore. He looked behind him, and saw the fifth Hokage, standing casually a few feet away from him. Her arms were folded together, she stared at him evenly, not giving away her emotions. Naruto yelped in surprise, scrambling to the dead end of the back alley. His eyes bulged. He had been worried that one day this day would come. He didn't plan on alternative action if the moment ever happened. He felt like an animal, trapped, on the brink of being slaughtered. Kushina analyzed the child's behavior carefully. It was the same as before, fear. His eyes kept darting around, obviously looking for any means of escape. He looked pitiful. I have to admit, Kushina started, staring at every twitch he made, trying to notice any signs that he would bolt. You're very hard to find. I spent the better half of the morning looking for you. No, she had been looking for him. She had actually hunted him down. Naruto wanted to cry. He knew it. That girl must have told her of what he did. She must have told her that he had tried to hurt her too. He had seen people making those excuses before. Now, here he was, at the mercy of the village leader he had yet to know. Oh God, he knew she was going to kill him. Kushina turned her eyes from him, eyeing the box that she was sure acted as his home. My guess is that that's your home. Kushina observed. Naruto mirrored her gesture. So she wanted to take that from him. Let her have it, he would find another soon enough. Kushina looked at him again. She stared at his form, taking note of his filthy clothing. Quote. Come with me, Kushina said, walking to the blonde. Naruto pushed his back against the wall when he noticed Kushina's advancement. He put his hands in the air to shield himself from a beating. He could never hope to fight back. She was Hokage, which meant she was more powerful than he could ever be. She grabbed one of his arms, hauling Naruto to his feet. Naruto whimpered in terror, shocked that this was really happening to him. He tried to pull away from the hand holding him, but Kushina squeezed more firmly. Shaky azure irises stared at the Hokage, dreading the worst. Kushina looked at the child indifferently. He must have thought the worst of her. It was okay, she really wasn't focused on what he thought of her. She started walking away from the alley, dragging Naruto with her. Naruto had to tell himself repeatedly not to hurt her. Hurting the village's leader could pose for something worse than death. He couldn't do that to himself, he had been through enough already. He didn't put up a fight, letting her drag him away from his home. He could only hope that fate would smile on him, just this once. Kushina dragged the reluctant child through the streets of Konoha. A lot of civilians stared at her, most of them were surprised to see their Hokage holding the demon brat, but she didn't look like she cared, so they didn't bother voice their thoughts. Naruto bowed his head. He didn't want to look into the malicious eyes of the civilians. He knew they would be smiling at his misfortune. He knew they would be snickering at him as he was dragged to his destination, his punishment. Kushina stopped walking when she spotted what she had been searching for. She turned towards a new direction and started strutting again. Naruto followed her, he could do little else. He just wanted to get it over with. He felt Kushina stop again. Sit down, boy. Naruto looked up. He saw Kushina seated on a chair and still holding his arm. Food assaulted his senses from all around him. He finally noticed where he was. A restaurant, but not just any restaurant, Ikiraku's. He had passed the place many days on end, smelling the wonderful aroma of different cuisines and hearing joyous laughter. It was a vicinity he never dreamed of ever stepping a foot in. But he was here. Sit down, Kushina repeated, more impatient. Naruto gulped and did as told. Kushina smiled at him. Good. Welcome to Aikiraku's. What can I get ya? Kushina looked at the young girl that addressed her. The girl stared back at her, then she turned her gaze on the boy. Kushina saw the girl's eyes turn to pity. So, she wasn't the only sane person around here. I'd like miso soup, please. She took a glance at Naruto. Bring him ramen. You got it, Hokage-sama. Their food soon arrived. Go ahead and eat it all, Kushina said. She started tasting her soup. She looked at Naruto and paused. He was just staring at the food. He looked like he was in a trance. Poison, 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 the mantra ran through his mind. He looked at the food in absolute horror. So the Hokage wanted to kill him by those means, just like Ka-san. At first, Kushina didn't understand why Naruto feared the food. Suddenly, she blinked in surprise, realizing her stupidity. You think it's poisoned? She queried. Naruto didn't say a thing. That was all the answer she needed. She grabbed the ramen bowl and brought it closer to herself. Naruto looked at her. He was finding anything the woman did more and more alarming. It's not poisoned, child, Kushina gently said. She took her own chopsticks and took a few strands of noodles into her mouth. She ate it delicately, being mindful to make sure that Naruto was watching her. She swallowed it down and opened her mouth for him to see. See, she said, smiling softly. This food isn't poisoned. I don't think I can be qualified as Hokage if I started killing civilians. Naruto stared at her. He was shocked that she had taken and tasted the food she had offered to him. He was even more shocked that it wasn't poisoned. She proved it. Even so, he never let his guard down, but his stomach had its disagreement. It grumbled, voicing its needs for everyone to hear. Kushina fixed him with a knowing look. You're hungry, so eat. She gave him the food again and Naruto stared at it. His mouth watered. He needed to eat something. He cursed himself for his weakness, but the overwhelming smell was just too tempting to ignore. He dug into his meal, using his hands to grab the noodles and shove them into his mouth. Kushina's eyes widened at the child's mannerism. He didn't even grab the chopsticks offered, he just ate like an animal. She decided to let it go, allow him the time to indulge himself. He had been through a lot. Naruto finished his food and burped. His belly never felt so full and his taste buds never felt so satisfied. He looked around. Every person in the restaurant stared at him in surprise, even the cooks. He thought they were shocked that the demon brat was in such an establishment, but realized that he might have went overboard with how he ate the food. Well, you sure have a healthy appetite, Kushina cut through the silence. Would you like another helping? Naruto frowned at her. Upon noticing his confusion, Kushina clarified, would you like more? Naruto didn't say anything. He didn't know if he should even depend on this woman, but his eyes gave him away. Kushina saw the look and turned to the waitress. Give him another bowl, please. Ah. Iyame, Hokage-sama. Iyame, please give the child another bowl. Yes, ma'am. The second bowl swiftly came. Go on, little one, eat up, Kushina coaxed, continuing to eat her own bowl of miso. Naruto paused and stared at the food again. He didn't move, never made an attempt to eat it. Kushina rolled her eyes. The child obviously had major trust issues. She took the bowl, took a morsel of noodles and ate them. She swallowed and opened her mouth again. No poison, she promised. Naruto happily accepted the meal after that. Kushina watched him eat in rapt interest. She would need to do a thorough investigation on the child. This whole poison thing was alarming in itself. Sarutobi would be just the right person to start. She cleared her throat. I want to make one thing clear. Naruto turned his gaze to her, but continued eating. My daughter, Mito, meant you no harm. She saw him freeze on the spot and continued, she's very caring towards people, even if they are strangers. She's far too innocent for her own good. She's a good girl and would never harm anyone. She looked Naruto in the eye. She was worried about you. Don't listen, it's lies. That's how they get you. They lower your guard and wait until you're defenseless. Then, they hurt you. Naruto looked away from the redhead. He ate his food much more slowly than before. His face looked troubled, uncertain. Kushina understood his reluctance to accept anything she said without definite proof. Trust was difficult to earn sometimes, especially to those who had their trust shoved back at them with betrayal. It's alright, you don't have to think too much. I just wanted you to know my daughter's intentions. Please, eat to your heart's content. Naruto had never eaten so much in his entire life. He couldn't remember the last time he had food of such quality and quantity. By the time he was done, stacks of plates stood tall on the counter. If I knew how much you were going to eat, I would have been a little more careful with your quantity. But it's fine, Kushina said. She took out money from her purse and paid for the food. She stood up and looked at the boy again. Come. Naruto hesitated. She wasn't holding him this time. He could escape. He looked around and noticed that people were ignoring his very existence. He expected to see angry faces, but why weren't they angry? Because of the Hokage. He shook his hand. Where did that thought come from? It didn't matter. This was as open. Kushina grabbed his hand. She saw him planning, it was written all over his face. She didn't need him running away. Come on, she ordered, dragging the boy with her. Naruto was on the streets again, this time he noticed the stares. Most people stared at him scornfully, others were smiling at him, but it wasn't friendly. His head dropped. He knew it. The Hokage was planning on killing him. She was just waiting for the right moment. He walked on numbly, his mind absent to all that was around him. By the time Kushina stopped, he had to hastily stop himself before he bumped into her. He looked up, expecting an execution ready for him, but that wasn't the case. He was at the park. Families were currently either lounging around or playing together. Naruto frowned. What on earth was going on? Kushina led the blonde to a bench. She took a sit, and motioned for the boy to do the same. Naruto did, apprehensive to what the red-headed Hokage was planning. This didn't seem normal. She shouldn't be treating him this way unless there was something in it for her. He didn't know what to think. Kushina closed her eyes and took in the fresh breeze. The weather was wonderful. There were no clouds in sight. Naruto looked down, feeling awkward and lost with the situation. This woman's actions made no sense. Why was she doing this to him? Was it to mess his already tortured mind? Did she get a kick in seeing him like this? Kushina opened her eyes and spoke, Listen, I don't know what you've been through. I can tell that it's a lot and it's none of my business, but I hope you remember that I'm your Hokage. Naruto just stared at her. Kushina was nonplussed. I swore an oath to look after this place and everyone in it, you're part of that everyone. Quote. It's okay if you don't trust me. Hell, I'm fine with it, but just know this, just like my daughter, I mean you no harm. She didn't know why she was saying these things. The villagers didn't have an effect on her like this one boy she was talking. She didn't know what compelled her to act the she was towards him. It was confusing to her. These feelings she was experiencing, they didn't make any sense to her. She looked at Naruto, and noticed that his eyes were drawn somewhere. She followed his gaze and saw an ice cream cart, it clicked. You want ice cream? Kushina asked, keeping her gaze on the cart. She stood up, and started walking. Don't go anywhere, I'll be right back. Naruto watched her leave him. This was his chance. He could finally make a run for it. His body refused to move. He tried to will it, but it didn't budge. Even when his mind screamed the command, his body had a mind of its own. He couldn't understand why his body wouldn't listen to him, why his senses weren't warning him of usual danger. Here, Kushina said, hand outstretched with an ice cream cone. I didn't know what flavor you wanted, so I kind of went in blind. Naruto looked at the ice cream, and then the Hokage, and then the cone again. Oh, I forgot, Kushina took the cone and licked it, no poison. She handed the ice cream to him and took a seat again. He ate in silence, neither saying anything. Kushina could tell that the child still didn't trust her, but that was fine with her. It will be handled soon enough. She stood up. I have duties to attend to. Don't worry about paying me anything. She started walking away, then her eyes widened. She looked back, noticing the boy's attention was still on her. He was very attentive, she had to admit. What's your name? Naruto's eyes grew at the question. Is that the reason she took him around and gave him food, to get a name out of him? His poor 7-year-old mind couldn't get it. His name meant nothing. Why was she so interested in it? A part of him was nervous in giving the woman anything. Another part of him felt it needed to be done. He felt like he owed her. He didn't like that feeling. Naruto Uzumaki. Kushina looked to the sky, processing the name. Well, I have to admit that's the first time I've ever heard anyone named Naruto. We share the same last name too. Who knows, maybe we're related. Naruto gaped at the woman. That was not the reply he was expecting. Kushina shook her head and smiled. Perhaps I'm just jumping the gun there. Well, Naruto, I want you to meet me at my home tomorrow. I have news for you, she said, walking away for the second time. Naruto watched the woman leave, even more bewildered than he had ever been. He looked at his ice cream cone. He was so confused. She wanted to see him tomorrow. Why was that? Was she planning something? She's suckering you, don't fall for it. It will be like Ka-san if you do. Naruto scowled. No, he will not be suckered. He will not be used. He dropped the ice cream cone on the ground and stood up. He headed home. He needed to relocate, find a place where no one could possibly discover him. Kushina arrived at the Namikaze estate. It was late at night, and she felt exhausted. Hokage paperwork was no joke. Hey, Ka-chan. How was your day? Mito questioned brightly, sitting in the lounge and watching television. It was fine, sweetie. How about you? I hope you're not mad at me for keeping you indoors. It's okay, I'm not sure I want to go outside yet. Don't act that way. You need to make friends soon. Mito pouted, I don't need friends. Sure, Kushina said, rolling her eyes. Are we going to cook together now? Kushina nodded happily. Yeah, let's make dinner. Yay, I get to help. Kushina went into the kitchen, followed by an enthusiastic Mito. The mother took out vegetables and pieces of chicken. She took out rice balls from the refrigerator. No, Ka-chan. Mito protested. Let's make our own rice balls. Kushina looked at Mito. Sweetie, ping, ping. Oh, that's the bell. Someone must be at the gate. Wait a moment, Mito. Kushina went outside and approached the gate. She was surprised that someone actually came to her house. Who would be here this late? Good evening, Hokage-sama. You have mail, a man bowed. Luckily for the mother, he was on the other side of the gate. Kushina nodded her thanks and took the envelope from the man. She went back into her home, tearing the envelope open and taking out a letter. Her eyes looked at the content. She read every detail. Mito, do you know where a quill is? It should be by the dining table, Ka-chan. Thanks, sweetie. Kushina found the quill. She dipped it in ink and wrote on the same letter she had received. She put the letter in a new envelope. She went back outside, noticing the man was still in the process of putting mail in other homes. Hey, she called. The man turned to her. Hokage-sama. Take this to the export box. Mark it as urgent. The man nodded, taking the letter. It will be done, my lady. Thank you, good night. She went back into her home. Ka-chan, are we gonna cook or what? Her daughter whined from the kitchen. I'm coming, Kushina grumbled playfully. She was thinking back to the day's events. She had done a lot of work on her first day as village leader. The council seemed quite satisfied with her efforts. They praised her without a second thought. The village treated her like a queen. To some, this could have been seen as a way of sucking up to the red-headed Uzumaki. It is just as you said it would be. Obito-kun. After analyzing all the information, it would seem prudent to form trade with Suna, a council member said. The council were seated in their usual places. Kushina had busied herself with paperwork during the meeting, reading and stamping anything she alleged as worthwhile. She hardly regarded the conversation with her own consent, satisfied with listening mildly as the council continued their banter. I disagree, another said. Suna at the moment has little to offer us when it comes to resources. They are already struggling as it is with the fundamental well-being of their very own village. Establishing trade with them could prove to be a liability. Kaharu regarded the members' words, then turned her gaze to their Hokage. What do you think, Hokage-sama? Kushina didn't raise her head to look at them, but she visibly paused her endeavor. She took a second longer, but acted too quick for anyone to pay any mind. This matter does not require my involvement as of yet. Continue to discuss it amongst yourselves. Homura frowned disapprovingly. This does require your attention. Although we understand that you brought all those papers and books so as not to lose sight of the copious amounts of administration left by Sarutobi, I can't fathom you leaving such an important decision to us so excessively. Kushina casually continued her work, saying indifferently, I said that this matter doesn't require my input as of yet. It does not mean I won't be involved when I see it fit to. Homura stared at her for a second, and then nodded, seemingly satisfied. As you wish. Kaharu decided to pick off where the important conversation ended. Back to Suna. It would seem that this isn't as easy as Lightning Country. Sume nodded her head. You're right. But in any case, I vote against forming an alliance with the Sand Village. Why is that? For a reason already pointed out. They do not have the resources that would satisfy and ensure our development. If we establish trade with them, then that would mean we would need to share our products and services. From the way I'm looking at it, they'll benefit more from this than Konoha. Kaharu nodded in agreement. It was a factual point that the Leaf Village had more to offer than sand. But, Shikaku chimed in, establishing a treaty and subsequent trade network could give us an advantage on villages such as Kumo. We will have access to more willing shinobi in both the tactical and medical directorates. It would increase our productivity and safety tenfold. Remember, they have a weapon that could become extremely beneficial if we ever needed it. It immediately dawned on most of what Shikaku was talking about. I see, Mebuki said. You mean the Sand Jinchuriki. Shikaku nodded. Sume clicked her tongue. It is a plausible price for an alliance. Adding our Jinchuriki to the mix would probably give us more power than we can handle. Kushina stopped reading a scroll and stared at the council members. They had her attention now. Yes, but there is still the problem of outweighed value. It is still very little to count when you think about two villages sharing valuable intel and merchandise. Weigh the positives from the negatives. Everyone turned to the person who had spoke, Kushina. Kushina cupped the side of her face with a hand, donning a bored, negligent posture. If you compare the good from the bad in earnest, then you can come to a solution of what choice is the right to make. You're already there, just simplify it. Okay, Inoichi said slowly, I guess the bad would be they have little resources to trade, meaning we would have little to get. A plus, Shikaku continued, would be they have a lot of shinobi who can offer us support. Furthermore, they have a Jinchuriki. Combining those two aspects creates a powerful prospect. Kushina nodded, anything else? The council exchanged glances, admittedly having nothing more to think of. Well, nothing major. I think those are the most important issues. Kushina nodded again, then the decision is easy to make. Taking account that Suna has never been openly hostile towards us, I propose we form an alliance with them. At first, some members looked to disagree. But after thinking it over, they really didn't know if it was wise to doubt the woman that had so much power over them. They murmured amongst each other, occasionally glancing back at their Hokage. Kushina stared back in disinterest. After a few minutes, the council made their decision. You are most wise, Hokage-sama. We agree to allow trade between us and Sunagakuer. Then that problem has been solved. Kaharu nodded, brimming a smile. Quite easily, in fact. You're sure living up to our expectations. I should hope so. Now, about the subject of the Jinchuriki of this village. Kaharu blinked at her. What about the child? I have not been given so much as an explanation on his activities or his whereabouts. Homura frowned in confusion. Oh, I thought Sarutobi would have told you by now. He has not. Kaharu took a pause to think. It's strange. He had been adamant to tell you himself, although we couldn't understand why. It wasn't as if the kid was important. Kushina furrowed her brows but said nothing. Well, reports have indicated that he lives off the streets now, Sume said. That's the first time I'm hearing about this. Wasn't he adopted? Inoichi asked, perturbed. He was, Kaharu said. But you're already aware that no person can ever harbor such a child under them without a motive. It is clear that there was. It's not as if the situation with the boy should be taken with too much care, a member put out. He is just a Jinchuriki, a weapon. Yes, you're right, Kaharu said. The only importance he wields is his value to us through Minato's sacrifice, nothing more. Kushina continued to listen patiently. It seemed that they had momentarily forgotten about her, but she didn't mind. They were talking. That's all she cared about. Kaharu finally addressed the Hokage apologetically, I am truly sorry that he shares your last name. But whether we like it or not, he was discovered as Naruto Uzumaki by Sarutobi himself. We cannot change it, unfortunately. Kushina didn't hear them. Her mind stopped the moment she heard Naruto's name mentioned. Her eyes were slightly wide, realization hitting harder than she understood. Koharu saw the look and explained, "It's exactly what you're thinking. The blonde boy at the celebration is him." Kushina mentally berated herself for the shock, wondering what had come over her. She looked the old woman and spoke softly, "I see. That was him. That's how this village treated Jinchuriki, that's how every village most likely treated Jinchuriki, as nothing more than tools for their use and disposal." Meeting adjourned, Kushina said suddenly, standing up and taking the paperwork with her. Before she went on her way, she eyed two empty seats. "I noticed those seats have been vacant ever since my arrival." Koharu followed her gaze and said, "Of course, the Uchiha and Hyuga clan are on undisclosed retreats. They should be back in a few days." Uchiha. Koharu stared at the Hokage worriedly. Her statement was odd. "That will be all," Kushina said, promptly leaving before anyone could converse with her. The redhead arrived home in record time. The council meeting had been very early in the morning. It had to be due to its importance. Currently, it was close to 8 in the morning. Kushina made her way past the gate of her estate, making sure to lock it in transit. She briefly saw an array of color flash from the gate itself. It must be the seal. She went inside, taking off her robes and setting them on a coat hanger. Now clad in a white and red kimono, she strutted into the kitchen. She took out utensils to prepare sustenance. She decided to make a nice, eatable breakfast for herself and Mito. She took out a pan and cooking oil. Carelessly pouring the liquid content on the pan, she let it heat up while taking out some eggs and bacon. She looked to her side and retrieved bread from the bread bin. It was an easy and quick breakfast to make: bacon, eggs, juice, and toast. She mentally gave herself a pat on the back. Mito would approve. "Ka-chan," Mito yawned, coming into the kitchen in her pajamas. Her form was anything but presentable. But since she wasn't doing anything in particular, she could care less. "Morning, little one," Kushina cooed. "Are you ready to eat? You made breakfast without you helping me." "Yes. Like I said before, Mito, I'm your Ka-chan." "Yeah, I know. Come on," Kushina motioned. They ate breakfast in comfortable silence. Kushina decided it was the right moment to strike up a conversation. "How old are you, Mito?" With a mouthful of food, Mito could only chew out a muffled 7. Kushina chuckled. "Don't talk with your mouth full, sweetie. Anyway, I think it's time to start your training." Mito blinked at her mother. "Training? Yes, I recently came across this." Kushina took out a little journal from her sleeve, handing it delicately to her daughter. Mito looked at the cover. Finding it strange, she looked at her mother. "Shinobi Code 101. Yes, little one. While doing paperwork, I read up a few things. I found this journal. Actually, I found two that looked exactly the same." She took out another identical small book. "What's it about?" "In order for you to learn to be a kunoichi, you need to understand the basics, from chakra to manipulation." Mito eyes lit up. "This will help me become a kunoichi." "That's right. Read first and then we can start with other stuff." It was helpful for me to look at it too. I'm assuming this was Minato's work. Mito grinned at her mother. "Thanks, Ka-chan. I can't wait to start learning kunoichi stuff." Kushina smiled at her. "My pleasure." Mito jumped out of her chair and cheered triumphantly. "I'll do my best." "That's good to hear. Hey, Ka-chan." "Yes. Do you think that one day, I'll be as strong as Obito ni?" "Don't say that name here." Kushina hissed, cutting the little redhead off. Mito squeaked at her mother's outburst. Her face was confused for a moment, then she comprehended. "Oh, sorry, Ka-chan. IIDD. Kushina was hugging her in the next second. "Shush, it's okay. Just be careful. You must never say that name here." "I understand," Mito softly said. "Okay." Kushina let go of her. "I have a few things to do today. Will you be okay without me?" "I'll be fine, Ka-chan. Be careful." "I will. Lock the gate and don't let anyone in." "Okay. Naruto stared ahead of him. Out there was the village. He was still hidden in the alley. He looked around. The box that he originally called home had withered to pieces. He had to get another one, but luckily, there had been no disputes. No one had stalked him down or even discovered his location. He remembered what the Hokage had said to him yesterday. She requested that he met her at her home. But there was no way in hell he was doing that. She had a motive. He knew she had a motive. And he suspected that she had treated him so nicely the other day as a means to lower his guard and strike. She didn't care about him. Why would she? Even if she was the Hokage, what value did he have towards her? He was homeless, filthy, and obviously alienated. She was up to something, and that something involved hurting him. Ka-san, his sweet Ka-san. Even now he could still remember her face. The smile she gave every time he did something wrong and apologized, the warm comfort of her hugs every time he felt down, her constant declaration of love even when he wondered why she would bother. How could he forget about that? That was just it, she was impossible to forget. And with that revelation, came the bitter reality that it had all been a lie, a way to lower his guard and literally stab him in the back. It was the same with Kushina. He knew her game. She was waiting patiently, just like Ka-san. She was waiting for the moment to strike, and it seemed it could be any time he let her in his heart. No, he couldn't stand that, not again. So it was safe to say that he wasn't going to see her today. In fact, he had planned on finding a new location to hide from prying eyes. But alas, he could not. No matter how he thought about it, it never ended well for him. His current location was the best possible place when it came to safety. No one bothered coming inside, afraid that the place might be cursed, and that stuck in his favor. Unfortunately for him, Kushina knew of where he lived. There was no doubt that she would be back, but whether it was to kill him or offer him something, he couldn't know. He just hoped, no, he prayed that she would just give him a day. He just needed one day to reflect. Only then, could he possibly face her more steadily. I thought I told you to come to my house today. Were you planning on staying here? Naruto mentally sulked. It seemed fate couldn't care less about his worries. He looked up, noticing the woman in front of him. She had a frown plastered on her face. But she didn't look angry, more annoyed than anything else. He just stood there, staring blankly at the Hokage, hoping above all hope that she would just leave him alone. Kushina eyed the boy in front of her. It was the same look as yesterday. He obviously didn't want her near him. She strongly suspected that it had something to do with his past. From what she was able to gather, the blonde had been adopted. So what happened? Deciding to focus on the current problem, she fixed a stern look to the kid. I know you don't trust me, Naruto, but I'm not your enemy here. There's a reason I called you to my home. I can understand why you didn't come, but I'm a little irritated in your lack of faith. Naruto's eyes were wide. It felt unusual hearing his name come out of the woman's lips. She had said it so cleanly, no malice, no mirth. He had already gotten used to demon, but hearing his name uttered on another's lips brought on a strange feeling. He shook his head, warding off thoughts of the other person who used to say his name like that. Kushina raised an eyebrow. I don't think I asked you a question. Whatever. Are you going to come with me willingly, or do I have to grab you like yesterday? Naruto grimaced, struggling to gulp down the lump in his throat. He knew it. She came to take him away. Maybe it was for real this time. Will you come willingly, Naruto? Kushina asked, softer than before. Naruto didn't think it was in his place to answer. Why bother denying the also-powerful Hokage? He nodded his head. No, I need to hear you say it. Naruto looked back at the woman. She had a frown that looked worried. He didn't know what to make of that, but right now, it didn't matter. Quote. Yes. Kushina beamed at him, surprising him greatly. Great, now come along. She walked graciously out of the alleyway, and Naruto begrudgingly followed. He kept his head down, avoiding eye contact with any village judgment. It wouldn't help to stare back at them, since they all hated his guts. Now he had to truly wonder where he was being led to. Yesterday had been a bit of a surprise. It was the first time anyone had ever treated him to food, as fake as it was. This day could end up the same way, or worse, death. It wasn't looking like a bad way to go these days. His life had been horrid from the start, and although he had survived and prevailed for so long, wasn't death the gateway to a better place? Wasn't there somewhere he could live in peace and not be treated like a dirty dog? His childish mind couldn't make a consensus, so he pouted, following the Hokage's feet. No small talk was exchanged, and Naruto was already used to Kushina's silence. So it came as a surprise when the mother did actually speak up. We're here. Naruto looked up so fast that he resembled a bobblehead. What greeted his eyes was another unexpected view. Kushina turned her attention to the surprised blonde and offered a little smile. It took some time, asking around, looking from place to place, negotiating deposits, but I guess I can be proud of my one-day effort. Naruto regarded the redhead, silently asking what she was talking about. Kushina saw the face and immediately picked up on the confusion. Oh, of course you must be lost. She looked back at the building that stood in front of her. It was a modest complex, with quite a few aligned rooms. It seemed recently painted in a light orange shade. The windows of each section looked brand new or replaced, but that was just the outside. I was told it was recently built for retired or off-duty shinobi and kunoichi veterans, and since I could hardly find a place that wasn't already full, I figured this place would be at least suitable for you. Come on, let's check the inside, Kushina said, already moving. Naruto was perplexed with what Kushina was saying. He couldn't grasp it, no matter how much his mind was pointing strongly to implications that shouldn't be there. It shocked him, while walking inside and staring at the beautiful furniture and decor, that he was still alive. This certainly wasn't the sort of place to kill a child, it looked too lavish, unless there was a secret room to kill demons. The pair climbed up a flight of stairs. Once they reached the intended floor, they made a right and passed 6 rooms. Kushina stopped at the 7th, and Naruto had to halt himself or risk bumping into the Hokage. He followed her gaze, and noticed the door that was in their way. Room 305, he murmured, never noticing he said it out loud. Kushina actually heard him. You can read. Naruto flinched at her surprised tone, fearfully deciding to keep silent. A tad wavered, Kushina returned her attention to the door. Well, Naruto, it's not much, but I hope you appreciate it. The Hokage opened the door. Inside the apartment room were boxes of furniture and unpacked foods. In the middle of the room was a woman with long raven hair, wearing a black kimono and shinobi sandals, in the process of unpacking a few boxes. Ize, Kushina called. The woman jumped, turned around, and hurriedly bowed. Good morning to you, Hokage-sama. Good morning, Kushina nodded. Ize took a brief look at Naruto. The blonde saw the woman's eyes flash and then she got back to work unpacking. Naruto couldn't tell what that look meant, but his instincts were already warning him of danger. Ize is my assistant, Kushina said. I asked her to be involved in helping you adjust to shelter. You are the first to be treated to free housing, child. If it works out better than I expected, I think I'll turn this entire complex into a shelter for the homeless. The Namikaze woman specifically chose her words. She didn't want to give any indication of false implications such as harmful intention to the boy. Using words such as program or experiment could probably set Naruto off the wrong way. She'd already seen how jumpy he could get. It was better leaving him a little confused than giving him bad ideas. Ize was another story on her own. Kushina sighed and shook her head, remembering what a chore it was getting the woman involved yesterday. Ize had refused to cooperate vehemently. It shocked Kushina when she witnessed the woman show such animosity and fear when she mentioned Naruto. That was before she found out that the blonde boy was the Jinchuriki. But Kushina had to force her hand. Ize had graduated with high colors in the medical field. Her expertise in counseling were revered by a lot of people. But it seemed her youth, she was only 20, was inhibiting her ability to act professionally. Kushina honestly considered casting the woman aside as a candidate, but no one else was best suited. However, she would need to keep a close eye on her. Ize, I have company, Kushina said, her rebuking tone causing Ize to jump again. The woman quickly turned around. My apologies, Hokage-sama. Good morning to you, Naruto-san. Naruto stood rigid. What was this? Why were these 2 women calling him by name? What happened to Demon? Were they ill-informed? Naruto, she greeted you, Kushina informed, expectantly looking at him. Naruto had no clue why Kushina was telling him the obvious. He stared back at her, his expression blank. Kushina shook her head. The boy had serious trust issues, very serious. She shouldn't have expected much, aside from the fact that he could read. You must greet her back. It's only polite, Kushina said. Naruto's eyes widened. He had forgotten. He looked at Ize and squeaked out a greeting. Ize was shocked with how scared Naruto looked. It was like he feared being punished. No, he was just hiding his true colors. This was the demon that killed her brother. There was no way those scared azure irises were genuine. She would put that aside for now, however. If she even thought about harming him, she was sure Kushina would make her pay dearly. The Hokage seemed to have an odd attachment towards the blonde, and Ize couldn't discern what the Hokage was thinking. She would have thought the entire idea ridiculous if there wasn't a catch to it. What do you think, Naruto? Do you like the room? Kushina asked the youngster casually. Naruto stared at her inanely. He couldn't grasp what Kushina was aiming at. Why was she asking him if he liked the room? What did it matter if he did? He looked at the area again. It was quite spacious, more than what he was used to anyway. It didn't seem too confined. Well, anything was better than his own home. He didn't quite understand why his opinion mattered. He wasn't stupid in thinking that Kushina didn't have a motive for asking. She could be offering the place to him as way to temporarily confuse him, and then she would strike. It was a plausible setup. The fact that Ize was in the room as well should have warranted worry from him, and oh, it did. Should he lie then? Should he say that this place wasn't nice, wasn't suitable? Maybe that's what the Hokage was aiming for in the first place, to confirm that she could treat him just like everyone else. Thinking up too many ifs was making his brain hurt. He didn't know what to do but stare into space. Kushina's arms were folded. She had been observing Naruto's reaction. It wasn't difficult to think that she had given him something arduous to answer to. Because if she was right, then Naruto was downright afraid of her. He didn't know her, but her title as Hokage might have broadened his judgment towards her. How Sarutobi allowed something like this to happen would always escape her. Incompetence. Do you like this place, Naruto? He didn't answer. Kushina massaged her chin. This was turning out to be exceedingly problematic. Communication was key, in this case, and if she didn't get an answer, she couldn't act out. Ize didn't know what to do herself. This was actually the first time she stood in the same room as the demon brat. It wasn't anything she had ever experienced, and she didn't know if it would be wise voicing her thoughts. Ize, you may go to the tower, Kushina informed suddenly. Ize's head perked up at the sudden request. She didn't expect Kushina to be kicking her out so quickly, but she welcomed the change. With a quick bow, she left the Uzumaki pair to their own devices. Once Kushina was certain that Ize was gone completely, she turned back to Naruto. She purposefully walked up to him, ignoring his fearful retreat at her advance. Naruto took steps back the moment she took steps forward. Kushina had an odd look on her face that he didn't like. It forced a shiver from his spine. His eyes were wide and dancing around, his heart was beating hard against his chest. He couldn't stop his stiff movements. It was like he was overwhelmed with a sense of hopelessness. When she grabbed his shoulders, he whimpered, shutting his eyes and tightening his body. He had a strong urge to pull away and dash for the exit, but it was difficult with so many negative possibilities. But when she sat down on a sofa and pulled him into a gentle embrace on her lap, that's when he reacted. The warmth, the comfort, her sweet scent overwhelming his sense of smell, it was just too much to handle. The emotional part of his brain reached critical level, and the logical part declared that his feelings were too unstable, so it blared massive warnings, triggering a desperate attempt at self-preservation. He struggled against her hold, fervently, trying to shake his body as hard as he could. He mistakenly hit Kushina a few times, but logic wasn't processing clearly. He just needed to survive. Kushina grimaced when she felt his strong resistance, and took the blows to her body like a champ. She had very little idea why she chose such a reckless approach, but it was actually subconscious movement. She had no idea what her body was doing until it was too late. She didn't pull away, however, and held on tighter the more he fought her off. The fear his body was exuding was evoking strong maternal instincts in her own body that usually reacted when something bad happened to Mito. She recalled the time when she first saw him. She remembered how he mesmerized her beyond understanding, how his face forced her into a trance. After that, he never left her mind for too long. But she wondered why that was. She couldn't thoroughly explain it, she didn't know how. Seeing him suffer made her ache a little, and to someone who didn't give any villager her time of day, that little ache was a very strong feeling. It made her want to do things she cogently knew were wrong. For someone in her position, having inconsistencies in rationality was dangerous, but here she was, hugging Naruto as protectively as she would her own daughter. He struggled for some time, flailing his arms and legs about like his life depended on it. Well, in a sensible interpretation, it did. After some time, that adrenaline pumping in his veins vanished completely. He was utterly spent, even laying his head on Kushina's shoulder to catch his breath. Kushina never lost her cool for a second. She let him do as he wished. It was easier now that he exhausted himself. It meant that he was much calmer to deal with. Putting strange thoughts entering her subconscious aside, she leaned back in the sofa, breathing softly. Do you like this place, Naruto? She asked quietly, waiting patiently for his reaction. Naruto nodded his head. He felt too weak to argue. He was slowly losing all sense of reality from the woman's hold. It was so much more placating than Ka-san. It felt too good to pull away. The betrayed part of him tried its damned best to fight off the unwelcoming feeling. But the lonely boy, looking for anyone to give him attention and security, never felt as safe as this moment. Good. From now on, this will be your home, Kushina announced, a bit surprised she didn't get any refusals. The fact that Aze would be also staying with him didn't seem like a topic to bring up yet. No, now that she thought about it, this opportunity gave her a very appealing idea. Since she was treating him to free housing, she might as well go all the way. She strongly wanted to. She looked down, eyeing his blonde hair. Have you ever thought of being a shinobi? There was a pause, but Naruto hesitantly raised his head. He tried and failed to keep eye contact, feeling slightly drowsy. Kushina noticed his fatigue immediately and decided to cut to the chase. If you become a shinobi, you can protect yourself from those who want to harm you. You can buy things and live alone if you want. You'll be strong enough to make a huge difference in your life. You could even become Hokage one day. His drowsiness temporarily forgotten, he stared at her with eyes so wide they looked like they were going to pop out. Hokage. That was actually possible for him. No one had ever told him of such a thing. Was she lying to him? Everything I said is the truth. She read his mind like an open book. You could be a great leader for this village. Then, people wouldn't treat you like this. He would be free. They would actually accept him. He knew being Hokage was a big thing, but he never thought it was this big. But wait, why lead these people? What had they done to deserve that out of him? Being Hokage sounded like an easy way out of being treated like shit, but could he really live with himself if he gave these people the power to take everything they did to him and cast it aside like an afterthought? No, they hurt him, terribly. Being Hokage would be like selling himself off to the wolves that bit his hands off. Getting revenge wasn't something he would entertain either. For all her wrongdoings, Ka-san was a great mother until she tore everything they had apart. Revenge is never good, she said. And from all of Sarutobi's talking with kids, it solidified that belief. So no revenge, but he didn't want to settle for less. Being a shinobi was a powerful prospect, he knew that quite well. So being the strongest shinobi was the best way to go. Why was he even thinking these things? He shouldn't be trusting anyone with his life, especially the fearful Hokage. Like he recalled, she definitely had a motive for everything she was doing. Nothing in this world was for free. He had to learn the awful truth the hard way. There was no way Kushina didn't expect something from him. But, he was way too tired to figure it out. His eyes felt heavy. And for some reason, his instincts weren't warning him to run away. Maybe it was the way she stroked his back, or maybe it was the scent of roses he smelled in the space nearest to her. But in any case, he was too tired to do anything. Kushina carefully took out a book. She put it on the table next to them. When she looked at Naruto again, she noticed his eyes closed, breathe even, and movements relaxed. She truly tried, but she couldn't stop herself from smiling at the sight. This kid had a weird effect on her, one she struggled to cognize. She gently put him on the sofa. She stood up and decided to leave, it was getting late. She would visit him the next day. There was no doubt in her mind that he would try to make a break for it once he realized that Aze was going to be sharing the same living quarters. He just needs time to adjust. She knew how difficult that was going to be. He was one person who was struggling extensively with emotional connection. The barrier in front of him could be considered something like a brick wall. Breaking through would require hitting it at its weaknesses. It absolutely had to be done. The dangers of his resentment as a Jinchuriki could very well affect Konoha's existence. That plus her mind was curiously pressuring her to do it. She sighed to herself. Until tomorrow, she had bigger issues to deal with as Hokage. See you soon, little one. As the door closed, Naruto's sleep seemed undaunted. For the first time his body melted into comfortable fabric. The soft feel was effective enough to keep him in slumber, and contentedly he napped. His head was rested on a pillow directly against the arm of the sofa. The arm was candidly next to the table. On the table lay a piece of Minato's work, one of the two things he left behind, most probably for his own children.